covered by darkness, still you don't seek the light. And the story is of a very distinguished disciple, lay disciple of Buddha, Vishakha, आपने नाम सुना होगा, उसको कई जगह आता है. She became Sotapanna at the age of 7 and then married and had a normal lay life. She had set up one of the monasteries of the Buddha. She was married to a very wealthy household. So once she took her friends, those who were devoted to drinking. So you can see drinking of women was there in 2500 years ago also. And those women, they kept on drinking even when they arrived at the monastery. So she was very upset, and then when Buddha saw this, he used his supernatural powers and he got the whole room darkened and then illumined the sky with strong light. So these women were frightened and awed also at the same time and became sober. And then Buddha admonished them for their behavior, for getting drunk in this manner, advising about avoiding this habit, and then recited this verse. And then the ladies hopefully gave up their drinking habit. So that is the story associated with this verse. It looks a bit strong, does it?
Yeah.
But it has a very, at least for old people like me, it is a very good message.
But it can also give some negative message also.
Well, it depends on what do you call negative, yeah. Yeah.
Negative in the sense that so probably the message here is never is not that you can't be happy.
The issue is, the message is that you are covered by darkness and still you are not seeking light. And because this joy and laughter which you are engaging in is associated with drinking, you know, those women were drinking. That's why the reference is important. So the women were drinking, dancing and singing around after having drunk the alcohol. So in that context he told them कि अंधकार में पड़ी हुई पता नहीं तुमको नशे में डांस कर रही हो and you are thinking you are joyous and you are happy. So that is the context. See it in that context, it becomes less harmful. Then it makes sense that one should. It's a strong advice that one should not get into a state of hallucination with these things. And then in hallucination तो आदमी बहुत खुश रहता है ना. Drugs वगैरह जो लेते हैं, they also live in a different world altogether. And later then they suffer enormously. I don't know whether you've seen anybody, a genuine drug addict. It's a terrible life, very terrible life. In Tihar, they conducted a course for them. My God, really a shock to see their behavior and how unhappy they are. So, Deepak, can you second?
Yes, sir. First, Chit Katang, Bimbang, Arukayang, Susitsang, Aturang, Bahus, Kandapang, Yes, Nathi, Zumang, Titi.
First means, first देखो, चित्त कथम बिंबम, बिंब मतलब जो प्रतिबिंब होता है, image. So look at this चित्त कथम, चित्त ने जो क्रिया बनाया है. Look at this mind created image. What is that? Arukayam samusitam. Aru means the wound. Kaya here means collection. So this body, which is actually like a collection of sores. Look at this mind created image of this body. Aturam means which is diseased, suffering. Bahu sankappam means having so many desires, so many plans. Yasya nathi dhvam chitti, which nothing is not. Dhvam means permanence, in which there is no permanence, or chitti means stability. So look at this mind-created image, which is talking about the human body actually, because what we see as a body outside and call it beautiful is actually an image created by the mind. It's not the reality of the body. It is only an image which we get through the optic nerve in our brain. He says, look at this mind-created image, a compounded heap of sores. It is diseased and yet has so many plans, in spite of the fact that it has no permanence or stability. That is the story. And the story is again about one courtesan. As you must be aware by now, in that era there was a tradition of having courtesans, some of whom were appointed by the king as courtesans. So one of them was this lady by the name Sirima, who was apparently very beautiful courtesan and devotee of Buddha, and used to offer him food to the monks. So, as luck would have it, one young monk fell in love with her after seeing her. And he, even without seeing, and then of course he became infatuated, and as the story says, she died after a few days. And then Buddha wanted to teach this young monk a lesson. So he asked the king that the corpse should not be buried for 4 days. Should not be. And after 4 days, he asked the young monk, why don't you go and look at that Sirima? And the young monk went there and he saw the corpse. He didn't know that she had died. So he went and saw the corpse with a bloated body after 4 days. And he was very deeply shocked to see that. And then the Buddha used that shock to teach him the impermanence of the human body and not getting infatuated with the human body, and then spoke about this verse. So that is the story associated with this verse. Again, mentioning of the natural degeneration of the body with passing of time. So the next, maybe Raman could read it. Is Raman able to hear us?
Yeah, he's typing something, sir. His mic is not working, sir.
Okay. Then I'll do it for him. Parijinnam idam rupam roga neelam pabhanguram bhijjati puti sandehu marananti jivitam. परिजिन्नम इदम means this, परिजिन्न means जो जीर्ण हो गई है, डिके हो गई है, रूपम बॉडी, रोग नीलम, रोग मतलब डिजीज, नील मतलब उसका घर जो बन गई है, इट इज बिकम a house or a nest here. So decayed is this body, frail nest of disease. पभंगुर मतलब जो क्षण भंगुर है, जो जल्दी समाप्त हो जाती है, impermanent. भिज्जति पूति संदेहो, भिज्जति means breaks up, Puti means dirty, Sandeho means the accumulation. So this is the foul mass which breaks up. Marnanti hi jivitam. Indeed, this body will eventually, this life will eventually end in death. So this is the reflection which Buddha gave to a very old lady, apparently 120 years old lady, who tumbled on while getting out of the way of the Buddha on his arms around, she tumbled. And then he told her, don't worry, you are very old and the body is frail and sick, and this is how it should be. So Buddha reflected on, Buddha's words were so powerful that she reflected on them and began a story, as the story says. So even recognition of the reality of diseased body, understanding its reality at that moment can result in a transformation of this view. So right understanding can emerge from there. So the last one now we will read. Can Sulesh read it or no? I don't think whether his mic is working.
He's typing something. No, it's the same issue.
And then the host should read it. Where is Akhilesh? He's not here?
No, sir. I think he slept very late in the night, so I have a message from almost 2:30. He's not able to come.
So,
So,
read.
यानि मानि अपत्थानि अलाबूनेव सारदे कापोतकानि अदिष्ठानि तानि तिस्वान् का रति.
यानि इमानि अपत्थानि अलाबूनेव सारदे कापूतकानि अट्ठीनि तानि विस्वान कारति. यानी दीज, यानी माने मतलब इन सब. कौन सी चीज की बात कर रहे हैं? अपत्थानी, जो फेंक दिए गए हैं. अलाबू नेव, अलाबू और एव तो उस तरह से. अलाबू इज घिया जिसे कहते हैं. घिया होती है ना, लंबी सफेद घिया जिसे हल्की सी हरी सी. शारदे, शारदे मतलब शरद ऋतु में. जैसे शरद ऋतु में घिया जो सूख जाती है उसको फेंक देते हैं, सूखी हुई घिया को. इसी प्रकार की कापुत कहानी. कापुत होता है पिजन, जो होता है कबूतर होता है ना, ग्रे कलर का जो कबूतर है. कापोत कहानी, कापोत जो उसके कलर की हैं. अट्ठी नहीं मतलब हड्डियाँ. तानी दिस्वान, उनको देखकर. तानी मतलब उनको, दिस्वान देखने पर. कारति, क्या उनके प्रति रति होगी या अटैचमेंट होगी. So what he's pointing out is those grey bones which are thrown away like gourd in the autumn season, seeing them, what liking for them can there be? So if you can see the things in that, because those bones are lying in our body also, which eventually will be thrown away after that. So this is the kind of instruction when people practice in symmetry meditation. So there's a story associated with it about the monks who went to practice meditation in a cemetery, and there they soon attained deep absorption, and they mistook that they have become arhants. So when they went to Buddha to tell him about their achievements, Buddha asked Ananda to ask them to go to cemetery first. And when they went there, they saw different corpses. So when they saw old decaying bodies, they were able to see them with equanimity. But when they saw some fresh corpses, they realized that they still had some sensual desires left in them. So in that way, they could see that they are not really, the jhana was not really leading, had not led them to arhantship. And then Buddha exhorted them with this verse. So that is the story associated with this verse. So you can see all of them pertain to the eventual decay and death of the body. So that's why they clubbed together in Jaravagga, old age, chapter on old age.
Silesh has a comment. Sir.
Let me read it. Often it's overall personality that is attractive, not body. Humbleness and kindness that attract others. These phrases may not work. Or does it? Yeah, I mean these are especially for the physical attachments. These things have been basically said. When somebody can arise lust on seeing a dead body, you can see the effect is directly of referring to the bodily attractions, the attraction associated with the body. So this is specifically for that case, this particular verse. Good. So Rajesh, over to you now. Did you get the mail?
Which mail, sir?
I sent you an email.
This one I got, sir. Oh, so you about your traveling, sir?
Yeah, I sent you a photograph.
Let me check, sir.
That is
So how's your tooth?
It's interesting, that's all. I'll show you how Buddhism got transformed.
Yeah. So I've seen this a real picture of this, not this one, but similar, embellishments in the.
Why don't you share it?
Sure, sir.
I wanted to mention something. Just look at that picture carefully. It's not
Just
only
a
embellishments. You see the number of hands.
Yeah. So the Devi's mixture with Buddha.
So that's why
Just
they say that no, Northern Buddhism was affected because this Padmasambhava went to Tibet, and then the Tibet had the influence of Ladakh, and so all those deities got mixed up. So this concept of, I think I'm told this is called Avalokiteshvara. So it has 10 hands, just as the Devi has 8 hands and so on. Or in some stories, Shiva also is supposed to have 10 hands. So you can see the kind of assimilation of local culture and the Buddhism as Buddhism grew. And this picture is from a monastery in Korea, which I visited 10 days back. My son had gone there. He said, "You also come and see." So in that area, they had gone for sea beach, but this very famous monastery was also there. It is set up in 671 AD. It's a very old monastery. Of course, it was destroyed and reset as usual. But that tradition is from such an old tradition. Probably the oldest Buddhist monastery in the whole of Korea. Korea has a strong Zen Buddhism tradition. Yeah, just turn it around. You can rotate it or no? Can you rotate the picture because it is coming upside down?
oh, just a second. ये तो ये रोटेट नहीं होगी हैं?
So what I wanted to point out was the admixture of in the Hindu concept of Devi with so many hands in the Buddhist concept of a deity. So what this teaches us is that the Buddhism assimilated and got assimilated by the local religions wherever it went. So we have to be careful about what we are when we study different things and different traditions. We should see that if you want to specifically, of course, study about it. So the whole of the northern region, northern Buddhism, that is in China, Japan, Korea, is strongly influenced by these concepts. Okay, that's what I just wanted to share with you. I was quite surprised. I didn't know that.
So you took this picture,
Yeah.
or this is the picture of the monastery taken by somebody else?
No, I took this. Right?
Okay. And there's a lot of gold around.
Yeah. It is upside down, So let's move further. I think we had completed this chapter.
Yes, sir.
So we should go to the next one. But you should briefly tell what have you studied till now.
So in the last one we were discussing how we can look at the pain of contraction, which is how Rodney Smith describes coming up of self, where we lose our interconnections, we become entrenched in our bodies, and then or we become even more entrenched in our views. So we start to contract, and then how we can look at that pain and get understanding out of that pain. And I think we were discussing the way out of the pain is actually through understanding of the pain and going through it. So he said that the chapter is titled "Finding Interconnection from Pain of Contraction." And one example that I took it from his book and went deeper is looking deeper into judgment, and how we can find understanding out of judgment. Judgment that we do pretty often. So Siddhesh has a comment on the picture.
Yeah, I responded to that. You see, it seems, I particularly don't have much as strong views on rituals as I used to have when I first started in the first few years of my meditation practice. I think the rituals which they do is for a particular purpose. I don't know what purpose, but they have rituals, but they also have meditation in their own way. What I interestingly found was there was a big statue of Buddha, the usual normal statue, separately. It was lying in the open, and huge statue. So since it is in the open, nobody can sit there in sun or rain or cold. So what they have done is just adjacent to the Buddha statue, they made a small room with a glass window. So you can sit inside, have a look at Buddha, close your eyes and meditate. I found it very, very interesting. I've never seen any such thing anywhere. So it shows they have that inclination to reflect deeply. That open, it is on the top of the mountain actually. This whole monastery is in the mountain. Actually, the whole mountain has been taken by the monastery. So at the top of it was that big statue, and then there was a room, small room, like you can say 2 or 3 cells of a meditation center, with the wall facing the Buddha statue made up of glass. So you can see the statue, close your eyes and meditate if you like. That was really very interesting observation. So they have their own ways. So all the monks, I think, have a tradition of some kind of a ritual puja and this thing. In all traditions, I think they have that. They maintain it for the sake of the benefits they get from that, because they understand the value of that. If you don't understand, and if you do it only like a mechanically, then obviously it becomes a meaningless ritual. Good, then let's move ahead.
So I think so what we also observe that even if we understand all these concepts intellectually, the patterns of the mind are so hardened and entrenched that the sense of self keep coming back during the investigations also, and it takes you over. So the patience and perseverance are the key at that time, and as soon as one gets to see that the sense of self has come back, we loosen that up and start to try to see non-personally and try to see things as in a more relaxed manner rather than coming out of self. And I think focusing relaxed and steady attention on these mental images slowly resolve them. This is, I think, he's trying to mention mostly in the meditation, that if you have, whenever you get any of these mental images or a memory or a worry or an anxiety coming, relaxed and steady attention on them will slowly and slowly dissolve them. This is similar to what I think we have heard, that regular meditation and regular observation practice will loosen up some of the habits that we have.
Good.
And skillfully backing away if the pain becomes too intense, because if there's a lot of pain and you keep on trying to put your attention on that, or a lot of worry and you try to focus a lot on the fact that why are you worrying, and that will actually get into a negative cycle. So whenever we find that we are the pain of the contraction, the pain of the trauma is too intense, we could back off, which is how I think we have learned some, what are called kushalopayas, where you could back off whenever you are overwhelmed, and moving forward into the pain patiently, if that is not the case, if you're not overwhelmed. Uh, Silesh says, I find certain people raise the sense of self. Should one avoid them or try and see through this phenomena? So,
Yes. Do you get this?
sir,
What does it mean, Shailesh, to say raise the sense of self? You mean they raise their sense or they cause our sense to rise?
So while Shailesh is typing, so one of the comment I have in what I understand, and it happens with me, is that sometimes some people, I find that some people have some repelling personality, the way I observe them, and whatever they do or whatever they speak, automatically a negative reaction comes in my brain about why they are doing this or why they are not doing that. Somehow I'm not able to accept somebody, and my mind always generates some negative reaction. It is one thing I've seen personally in myself.
See, I've also noticed it and tried to penetrate it deeply. And I found most cases that it was based, I'm talking of myself, with respect to some people, some of them very close. Usually it happens with people very close to you, maybe in the family, somebody, or friend circle. But it is basically because of my strong expectation of a particular kind of behavior that I have formed a mental image that this person is of this kind, and he or she will always say something which is stupid, which is not very intelligent, and I form an opinion that this person is very shallow minded, or this person is not a good meditator, or this person does not appreciate meditation at all, or that this person is very greedy, or this person is very money minded. These kind of strong patterns I found I had made about some people. And when I started questioning them and looking at how the person is behaving and seeing its immediate interpretation and then seeing its subsequent interpretation, I found that the problem was with me really. I was not in a position to appreciate the background of that person, that person has come from a certain different background. His or her long sankharas, the conditioning is of particular kind. My sankharas, conditioning are of particular kind. And somehow I tend to think my sankharas are better and her or his sankharas are not good. And that creates a conflict. And then we say that the person is provoking, acting as a stimulus for arising of self or in the form of anger or aversion or whatever. I think whenever this happens, that is the opportunity for us to be patient and observe. Issue of empathy and empathetic listening is greatly important under that situation. So we need to break these strong patterns which we have made up in our mind. I think awareness of these patterns is the first step in trying to break them. So first we have to recognize, are there any such patterns? If somebody's speech is always making me upset, then it is very likely that there is some strong prejudice I have developed towards him or her. So I think we need to reflect upon it and see through that prejudice slowly, patiently. At least I found that I had. And once I found that I had the prejudice, then I could slowly reduce it. I won't say it is gone, but certainly reduce it, and then the kind of automatic reactions will drastically come down. Does it answer the question? Or?
Yes, sir. Actually, I can actually agree in the sense that we need to see our mental reaction of how we are reacting as seeing other person or seeing actions of the person. And once we are able to see our reaction, then not reacting in habitual way, and slowly more automatic control will come
See, with
for our
respect to
reaction.
people with whom we react very often, whether in office or at home, this kind of stereotyping happens. Stereotyping means you form a mental image. ये तो ऐसा ही है, ये तो ऐसी ही है, तो ऐसे हमेशा ऐसे ही बोलेगी, ये ऐसे ही बोलेगा, ये हमेशा मेरा बुराई चाहता है, ये कड़वा ही बोलेगा. और these kind of stereotypes जो patterns बन जाते हैं ना माइंड में, तो वो पैटर्न बड़े रिजिड हो जाते हैं. तो उनको धीरे धीरे
So,
धीरे धीरे रिकॉग्नाइज
there's
करना.
another aspect which I've seen is that at least in office situation, uh, there are certain things which I don't like. There are certain people I don't like the way my ego reacts. So I'm not saying that whether they are correct or not, because I find them not according to my standards, or I want them to be other way. And one other thing which I've seen as a easy thing out is that to just vent your anger, not in front of them, but when those persons are not there, just sharing your anger with your friend and venting your anger and then making fun of the situation, it becomes an easy way out, and it kind of relaxes the tension and in a short moment. But those issues remain, and those situations where one gets tense remain. So it's not a problem to the solution, but it becomes the easy way out.
Yeah, well, it is like a short firefighting measure, but
Yes.
the doing it repeatedly would only intensify the pattern.
Yes, sir.
So
Yeah.
these things are happening basically because of, if you see the title of this slide, pain of contraction. We are contracting from the persons. We want to contract from the situation. We are not able to appreciate the interconnectedness of existence. So if we
Yes.
are able to, and it is a clear sign of strong, sense of differentiation between me and the surroundings. So it's very, very difficult, no doubt. It seems very, very difficult, especially as Shailesh has mentioned that if we try to break through our patterns, some people may see it as our weakness, and I think Arpan had also some time back mentioned. But you see, the issue of strength and weakness is something which I have to define. Whether I call my shouting at people my strength, or whether I call my accepting people for what they are and taking appropriate action as strength, it depends on my understanding. It does not mean that we kind of overlook bad behavior, or we allow people to trample upon us in that limited domain of work. It doesn't mean that. One can act strongly and yet maintain deep inside a sense of metta and a goodwill and a friendship towards others. It's possible. One can do that. And that is certainly a much more skillful way of handling very difficult situations, because otherwise we internally keep on strengthening our habit pattern of aversion towards unpleasant people, situation, things, and we'll never be in a position to get out of aversion. So it is tough, no doubt, but then as seekers and people who want to follow the teachings of the Buddha, as people who want to get out of this mess of suffering, the way through is the only way. There's no other way. You have to pass through the fire to be able to see that the fire was an illusion.
Yes, sir. I just wanted to add one thing where, and because this is so common, it happens to all of us. So, I was also thinking about this and investigating, some of this, and suddenly a thought came to my mind, which was that I was trying to justify almost every time justify my reactions based on why they occurred because of somebody, as you said, somebody else's lack of understanding of the situation, or why can't they understand these simple things and stuff like that. And then I suddenly realized that maybe I am put in this situation by, what we can call the universe, just to show that the kind of high opinion that I have about myself, which is that I don't react to these situations, is false. If put into a slightly adverse situation, I will react like this. So then I realized, oh, maybe that's the reason why I encountered these situations, so that I can see through my own reactions. If I generally get all simple or easy to manage the situations, I feel that I am very calm and peaceful. So I make an opinion about myself.
Yeah, that's very right. In fact, there's a sutta I remember to have studied on exactly the same format. Story about a queen of a king who was very well known as a very kind person, who treated her servants also very well and looked after everybody in the house, never getting upset, never getting angry. And she had a servant, a maid servant or whatever they must be calling those days, who actually was a very good person, who was a devotee of Buddha and a very good understanding of the teachings. So what did she say? She was talking to her friends and she said that it's not that lady is so wonderful, it is basically because we all behave well with her that she is also behaving well with her. So to prove that point, that the servant knowingly she started committing mistakes. She would put food and किसी दिन salt ज़्यादा डाल दिया, किसी दिन खाना गिरा दिया, and that queen started getting angry and upset with her again and again and again, and to the extent that one day she beat her up and threw her out of the house, and then she told people that this is the
Yes, sir. Sometimes that hits you, that maybe life is teaching you a lesson by this circumstance.
Yes, that's right. That quotation of Shanti Deva which I read in this book is really very good. We are not here to change the world is here to change us. It's
Absolutely.
very, very.
Yeah.
Because if you look at it in that limited sense, some friends said, क्या है यार तुम जिसका मतलब तुम कुछ काम ही नहीं करना चाहते हो. It doesn't mean that. It means something more profound than that.
Yeah.
So people can misunderstand that this is the strongest, the biggest alibi कि छोड़ो संसार को बाहर में जाने दो, अपना आराम से बैठो. It doesn't really mean it. It means in a very deep way that the world will transform you and then you will transform the world.
So after that, Rodney introduces something that he has used in the rest of the book a lot, which is radical accountability, which is I think we were just trying to touch upon that topic.
Radical accountability in the language of the Buddhist jargon can be said to understand that whatever I am the most cause of my suffering. That is simple. That if I suffer, it is because of me, not because of others.
Right.
And if you take that as the radical view, I mean, because apparently it seems यार वो तुमको गाली दे रहा है और तुम कह रहे हो कि मैं सफर कर रहा हूँ, वो मेरा बुरा भला कर रहा है, मेरा नुकसान कर रहा है, तुम कह रहे हो कि वो मैं अपने दुख का कारण हूँ. But so radically, that's why the word radical is used. That it is basically we are the cause of our suffering.
Right. I think very well summarized, sir. Because radical, he's using it from a lot of Western viewpoint that we don't see the accountability of a situation always on us. We always see the accountability on the circumstances why they occurred. And he said that the suffering is because of you, not, and you have to be accountable for your own suffering. So that's why he's using the word radical accountability. So thought is often a reaction to an emotion and is an attempt to justify the experience of that emotion. So this is, I think I find this very nice because it allows you to reflect upon two different aspects, which is what is the experience of an emotion and what is the reaction to an emotion. So and they feed on each other. So if there's an unpleasant experience that we have because, as we were discussing, somebody has said anything to you that has caused you some anger, and the whole body is feeling the emotion, but we are completely disconnected with the body, and the thoughts that get fed from that experience actually start to justify why we are feeling that experience to outside circumstances. And once we start to recognize the difference between these two, and if we just remain with the experience and don't try to get over that experience, whatever is we experiencing, we experience that. These thoughts that are fed into the experience generally goes down and down, and the experience obviously will end after its own, half-life kind of things are over, and slowly fades away. And then as it says, it's circular thinking. Emotion then feeds off the explanation, and explanation feeds the emotion back. And because of this fact that we kind of now have known that there is no single cause of an event, all events are caused by numerous factors. It's a very narrow explanation for in our mind that to attribute a cause to something bad to a single event. So the mind becomes desperate to get away from the implications of having an unpleasant emotion.
Just 1 minute, there's some need for me to shift. Huh?
Sure, sir.
जब ये हुई थी दिसंबर, एक गोदी में बीच में है, एक तरफ मतलब आप दोनों में तो मेरे मम्मी पापा फिर आपने खींची तो उधर मैंने मेरे दिमाग में था मतलब इंटायर हमारी जो फैमिली है पहली बार जो है उसकी स्पेशल मोमेंट में आउटसाइड इंडिया एक बार कोरिया में अब इसको मैंने बोला very important
Yes, please. Sorry.
So how old was your daughter, granddaughter, sir? Now?
Now in the 10th month, completed 9 months.
She's very cute.
Yeah, she keeps her parents busy. Good. She'll teach a lot of patience to them, I'm sure. Good.
Yeah. So I think radical accountability also means that to see our habit pattern where as soon as we have an unpleasant emotion, our mind desperately wants to get away from its implications, and then the best way it knows is to blame on somebody else for that, for your emotional reaction of that event, and that way it can feel that it's not because of me, it's because of somebody else. And what this is what he calls the leakage of blame uh, around every unsettling emotion, and that is what creates havoc in the rest of our life, where we feel that it's you who make me angry, or the other way around is that it's you who make me happy, because they are the two sides of the same coin. Because as soon as it's you who make me happy, there are some things that the other person is doing that's making you happy. As soon as he or she stops doing that, it's again you who are making me angry, because now you are not following what I am expecting out of you. So taking responsibility of our own emotions and our own reactions to those emotions is the radical accountability. So Silesh has a comment: blame versus objective view. How do you differentiate? I think what I understand as the difference between blame and objective view is what's the how you're feeling inside. If you are, and if you connect with your body, you will see that, and when you're blaming, you're feeling terribly bad inside you. And if you are having an objective view, you have a very light experience inside you, because you know that you are not taking sides. It's very objective view. But if you
What is the meaning of it?
objective view is basically seeing things in the outside and saying that, yeah, this is happening because of this. You can make an opinion. You could still do judgments that this is objectively right than this. Most of the times, it is easier to do when we are not involved. Then you can easily find an objective view. But as soon as we are involved, it becomes much difficult to do an objective. But Silesh, is that what you were referring to? Sir, you want to add something to this?
No, that's perfect. I think the objective means when our subjective perceptions and subjective expectations and fears are not coloring the perception. And we see things as they really are without really taking them personally. So the blame comes in when we take things personally. So if we are able to see a situation without getting upset, which means that we are at peace with ourselves, then most likely it is an objective. Most likely, because we can't be absolutely sure. I'm told that the people who train their minds can be very objective in deciding how to kill and how to plan for that mafia outlets and all that. So we don't know about them, but for most people it's quite clear that because if you can stifle the mind's inner voice to such an extent that you may not be able to feel the difference immediately, but in the long run it will definitely haunt. But for most of us, 99.99%, I think, any act in which our personality gets involved in any way, it creates a disturbance in the mind and the body. And you can distill. So if you have an objective awareness of body and the mind, you will be able to know, yeah, I'm upset or I'm excited. Then whether we are upset or excited, the view cannot be objective. There will be some coloring of the perception.
So more on radical accountability. Radical accountability demands sealing off any and all projections and being fully accountable for our inner life. uh, where we should not project how we are feeling internally to anything outside, because radical accountability says that what we are feeling inside, we are the only one who are accountable for that. And interestingly, this is very true. When we seal off the external blame, there's still the temptation to blame me, which is where most people start to get into negative thinking loops, and they start to blame an image about themselves, which is an image that they have created about me, and then the whole depression cycles start. Uh, we need to be very observant of that also, because uh, that is also you know another way the mind uh, starts to run away from feeling the emotion, uh, or facing the emotion, and try to create reasons out of that. So reasons are thoughts, emotions are real, you can feel them, so reasons are created by the mind. uh, and he actually explains that in the next sentence, which is, with radical accountability, all emotions are observed as experiences only, pointing nowhere, implicating no one, and signifying nothing. They are the pure experience that is happening in the terms of Eckhart Tolle in the now. And if you start to point it to somewhere or start to project it some outside, you have actually stopped experiencing the emotion, and you have gone into the world of thoughts, which is abstract, which is artificial and created. Emotions are, real. And I think that is why, lot of practices that we hear about, and especially what we have learned in the camps, is to make sure that we are connected with our body and sensations. If we expand that to whatever we can feel inside in the body, whether they are emotions or feelings, the state of the mind, the texture of the mind, uh, we can easily see that they are real. They are happening in the now. But as soon as you start to create thoughts on top of that, they seem very abstract, because you could create X thought or you could create Y thought, depends on you. But the emotion is happening now. Uh, and I think he's used this in the other quotes also, where it says emotions need observation and allowance, not our analysis or fixation. Um, Story that accompanies with emotion dies with radical accountability, because story on top of an emotion, or abstract thoughts on top of an emotion, are artificial, are generated by us. So it means the story was never true to begin with. Only the emotions were.
Good.
So Siddesh is saying sounds like RA is achieved by mindfulness. Yes, so radical accountability. So mindfulness is the core of most of the things. That's how we recognize inside ourselves uh, that we have drifted away from emotion and into the realm of thoughts which are projecting to people outside or circumstances outside. And that's exactly what this next slide's first sentence means, Sulesh. It says that awareness knows the difference between experience and mind's overlay of opinions. And I think I read somewhere in some of the chapters there, he said that that's the core of really trying to understand the basic skills. If we say is that's the only core skill, that if we can understand through our awareness what is the difference between uh, experiencing and what is the difference between experience and the mind's overlay of opinions on top of that experience. So as soon as we start to recognize that inside our mind, uh, the mind's overlay almost always goes away, because that's my words put into this is anything which is untrue. As soon as you try to recognize it, it will always fade away. So if you're feeling some thoughts or making some opinions, and you become purely aware of that, whatever was not required at that time or whatever was untrue, as the Rodney says, will fade away. The experience will still remain, and the experience will take its own time. And as all physical experiences also take time and go away, that experience also goes away. Developing a correct orientation to experiences by releasing the mental explanation is the first requirement of accountability. This sounds very, as there's was saying, lethargic kind of stuff, that if we are having some or inaction kind of orientation, if someone would put that way, where we say that the only orientation we would have is to see the experience and not try to fix it. But I think I personally feel is that as we saw in that video also that I just sent, the more we try to fix things from the sense of self, that is what is we are cautioned against. But if we try to see the experience as the experience and not try to bring an controller out of it and which tries to fix things, a natural action will happen, which will happen with your body giving you with full signals that you are in complete state of relaxed action. Those actions are happening through you. Those are the right things that needs to be done, and that's why you're doing it. You have not created a solution thought by a mind to do those things as a response to that experience. So you could respond in this. So from our outside world, it may seem that you are acting the same way, but whether that action has come out of your sense of personality, thinking that yes, I have created a solution out of this problem by thinking through the problem, then it's you're doing it very personally. But if you just try to do a relaxed attention towards it and not try to create a personal solution out of it, very often we find that what is right that needs to be done in that situation automatically pops up in our mind, and you will not put an ownership of that yes, I created that solution. That came to your mind because that was the right thing to do at that time, and then you go ahead and do it. So the next point, next thing I like, which I noted, was that the more we spend time being awake, the more wakefulness asserts itself, and through our intentions. This is what I believe is that it, as the worry is a cyclic thing, being awake or being aware in the day-to-day life is also very cyclic. The more we spend time in awareness, the more reminders we get in day-to-day life, and those happen through our intentions and come back to the wakefulness state. And one of his employees, Rodney Smith's organization's employees working with him, did say this, that presence becomes an acquired taste. So you start to like it the more you do it. Right? So another area of contraction we have just discussed, is the tolerance to the views of others. He uses this term very nicely, that we say that we are very tolerant to other people, but if we see deeply, you could find that receptivity could be limited to the people who share our views of tolerance. but not to the closed-minded people. So we say we are tolerant, but we become tolerant also to a small set of people who uh, who share what tolerance means with your views. And he actually took an example that in the hospice organization that he was, there was a very orthodox missionary Christian organization that came and said that we want to provide help and support. And most of the people in his organization felt that those people are very fundamental and they are very missionary. They want to, recruit people in their organizations, and they had a certain view of them, and they said that we should not be associating ourselves with that or taking their help. And then Rodney said that we claim ourselves to be open, claim ourselves to be tolerant, but we limit ourselves to that for certain segment of the society, certain people. You could. It's a different matter where you could start this and say that you don't like this, or you don't want to run it like that, and then you may want to be objective, as Lish was saying later on. But in the beginning itself, when you make a perception out of a perception, make an opinion, and do an action out of that, that's actions coming out of our emotional reaction to the situation. In that case, the emotional reaction was that these people are like that, and we should not associate ourselves with them. And I think the one thing that he discusses a lot is that, which is title of the slide, is the questioning the known. Sense of self forms conclusions because it fears living within the ambiguity of a question, and that was also very very different for me to read when I read that, and eye-opening also, that we don't like living in the ambiguity of a question. We always like to comfort ourselves that we know the solution of this. If the question is there, we always strive to find the mental solution or an opinion and say, yes, we have found it. This is how it needs to be resolved, and that's the only time when we feel relaxed. And the sense of self always wants to go in the horizontal and try to find solutions, and it does not like living in the ambiguity of a question. So he says that the questions are moments of wonderment, but they don't provide the security of assurance. And in the openness of the question, we can actually find, not from the sense of self, but coming together with the interconnectedness, some creative solutions. So most of the creative thinking or creativeness happens when we take away the self out of the picture. If you see, most of the creative people do that, and we've heard a lot of genius people saying that things pop up in their mind when they are least thinking about it. The more we try to think through things and not leave the question in mind for its wonderment to open up, more we try to live in the known and disconnect ourselves from the rest of the universe, which had infinite intelligence and can guide us with lot better solutions to save, I think. Silesius is saying, great slide, our surroundings have big influence and at times hard to have tolerance. But see the point here you make. Yeah, I think that's a lot of chapters on Rodney Smith was very heartening, and he questions a lot of our basic assumptions, and opens ourselves up to many of these things which we take for granted, and we believe that yeah, that's the way to think. And so questioning the known further going forward, some of the quotes that he mentioned were like, "I begin to fall in love with mystery of not knowing." This is during the experiences of his monk period, where he would take a concept that was a Buddhist concept that was being taught, and and try to see through it, try to really forcefully contemplate it, and then as it happens, you know, there will be some other things that will happen where it will shape his viewpoint, and then he left open everything. He said, "Why am I trying to find solutions? Why can't I just keep the question open and live with it?" And as soon as he did that, he found a sense of peace, and things started to resolve for themselves, and he began in love with the mystery of not knowing. Uh, so he said earlier, not knowing was a state to pass over as quickly as possible because it was confusing and disorienting. So the state of not knowing is something that we have aversion to. The sense of self always wants to resolve it. Uh, so, and then he started to move towards beginning to fall in love with mystery of it. Earlier, he said that earlier I had wanted to know the moment, but not live the moment. Because if at that moment you don't have solution, you will not like to live that. You would just want to move away from it. I started to appreciate living the question rather than having the answer. I was most alive in wonder of the curiosity that existed before the answer came known. And that was very interesting. He said he was most alive when he was in the wonder of curiosity. He felt the aliveness at the most at that time, rather than at time where at the end when the answers became known to him. And so spiritual questions have a compelling force of discovery. All our spiritual questions that we have in our mind also fall in that category. We have a very compelling force where we are trying to find answers to our spiritual questions in a very compelling manner. That who am I? Whether the self is there or not, or self is like this or self is like that. We have a lot of spiritual questions in our mind, and when we try to struggle for its answers, rather than just living in them being unknown, and let the wisdom come to us rather than we reaching out to the wisdom. Willingness to put aside everything for the sake of wonderment, and Sri says, but knowing gives us comfort. We are drawn to comfort always, isn't it? Yes, and you're absolutely right. I think that's how we generally see it. But what I get from what Rodney is saying is that initially that's how we perceive that knowing gives us comfort and not knowing gives us the unease. But if we see it deeply, and if we keep the options open, keep the question open, just the wonderment of this being open and letting the wisdom come to us can be even more, as he said, most alive experience than the experience of knowing the things. You could say that it's similar to trying to do something to achieve happiness, right? And that's what we always want. As you said, we always want the happiness, or we always want the suffering to go away. But if you see deeply, you will find that as we were discussing last time, the efforts that come out of the self are to get away from suffering are the actually cause of suffering. So the effort that we do to know the solution, to be in the knowing, uh, eventually to reach to a comfort, are the actually things that keep us away from comfort. So it's again the same paradox. Knowing gives us comfort. That's why we make an effort to know, but that's the actually core reason why we don't feel comfortable. Sir, you want to add something?
See, this knowing here, I think we need to be careful. What he's mentioning is knowing from a purely intellectual perspective. When we talk of I know something, it usually means knowing through intellectual perspective, and which is a kind of sanya, which is a compounded knowledge based on past understanding. Then it is always it is bound to be tentative, but we take it for fixed. So in the spiritual questions, that kind of knowing is not of much help. In case of intellectual questions, obviously that kind of knowing is of great help. It gives us comfort. So when we knew that when there is lightning, we understood it, the phenomena was understood, then the fear of lightning was reduced drastically. When we knew that this is the reason which causes fire, and we knew how to handle it, then the fear of fire was reduced. So that cannot be denied. That is with respect to the sensual domain, the sensory domain. When we talk of spiritual questions like who am I, and then you try to answer them intellectually, then obviously you will not get satisfied. So to try to get a intellectually satisfying answer to a spiritual question like that, why am I suffering? And you try to get an intellectual answer to it, it will be very, very unsatisfactory, even if you come to the right answer. So that is the main issue, that with the questions which pertain to the human being, the fundamental questions of suffering, of existential questions, there the second-hand answers from the intellect don't satisfy. That is their nature. So one has to have a direct experience of it. Then only you become really established in Dhamma. Otherwise, at least intellectually, many of us understand these things. We understand that notion of self is a illusion, mental construct, and so on. Yet it does not get kind of assimilated as part of our being, and we are not able to live by it every moment. That's the reason of a difference between intellectual answer to a question and the deeper realization of the answer. In the external domain, intellectual answers can be satisfying and can give us comfort, as you pointed out. We know that these sockets have 220 volt, and we know that if we put our hand, we'll get shock. So we are intellectually understood, we'll never do that. But we also know that getting angry makes us suffer, yet we are not able to give up anger because of the strong nature of entrapment in which the psyche is caught, and the strong nature of the tenacious nature of the illusion of self. So we have to see that difference.
So, in the same context, how the
You mentioned that
I think
Chapter 5 of the book. That would be good. This is the title of chapter 5 of the book.
This is, sorry sir,
You were
this is
mentioning
chapter 5.
chapter 5, the title, like questioning the known. So that we
Right.
know that we have many more chapters to go.
Yes, sir. So I have not created slides for last few chapters, so we go till. So I think in the same context, when we try to know or try to question, uh, the questions that we ask generally, which fall in the horizontal domain, is how to get over my anger, when will I get enlightenment, uh, how do I, why do I have restlessness, how do I maintain this, and if you, I think if you see that most of these things are coming from a sense of self who's trying to, again, the same self is trying to know, as I was saying, trying to know some of these spiritual or deeper questions, and it's kind of an effort being made by the self to look in, lean into the question and try to find a solution of that. We use this term in the office also, lean forward and lean back way of doing things. When we do lean forward, then we're making an effort to uh, try to find things into it. So most of the horizontal questions are that, and he says that those, it will be very difficult for you to get satisfying answers, and even if you do, they will not last for long because they're all based on the horizontal assumptions that there is an I which is getting angry and there is an I which is getting enlightenment. So the basic assumptions of them are on which they are built are wrong. So it is very difficult for you to reach an answer which you will find satisfying. And if you switch over to vertical questions and leave them open, uh, you would stop trying to find an answer for them, and you will find yourself to be uh, in a state where you can see that the sense of self is not operating, or you can at least become aware that earlier you were operating from sense of self. If you are into trying to lean into most of the horizontal questions, then it is difficult to see the sense of self operating. So the vertical questions like who am I, what is this, means what you are experiencing. So can you question that? What is this? Or is this true? What you're experiencing, is this true or is this illusionary? And questions like what is seen through the eyes, these, and he does mention and warn them that these are not questions for contemplation. As soon as you lean into them and you try to make an effort from the sense of control to contemplate them, you will actually send them to horizontal universe for resolving, which again I think will take you back into those rounds of circular rounds of thinkings. They are questions for living our intentions, and they are questions where I found that they are the questions which take you the most away from being driven by the sense of self. Because if you question the sense of self itself, then you getting lost in the drive of the self decreases. So the vertical universe is unformed within stillness. It's unformed, and this is very similar to what Eckhart Tolle says. The form that we see, whether it is physical or the mental, it comes into existence uh, through our own thinking. Uh, and the vertical universe is unformed. It's just the potentiality. It's within stillness. A question is entry to vertical because it's wide open and unformed. So these questions, the vertical questions that we talked about, they are unformed because they don't have a ready-made solution that you can find comfort in, and that's why they are an entry to the vertical for us. There is no way for sense of self to acquire this stillness. Stillness is what remains when you stop trying to find it. You know, I found that very very profound. If you go and try to find stillness, you will never be able to find it. The only way is to stop trying as well as stop. It's basically simple stopping. Stopping is what happens when we have nowhere to go and no thought to turn around. I use this example in many of our conversations. So what is stillness here? As Vish is saying, it's very difficult to put in the words. As stillness is the potentiality, I think, from where everything comes into being. I'm not talking of the
Maybe
the physical stuff.
Explain again in negative way.
Yeah, I think you're
Rather
right.
than trying to say this.
What is stillness? He uses this nice, people put it nicely. You can only explain it in a negative way, which means I use this in my last slide also, where we said that if you have to explain somebody a darkness, how would you explain it? You can only explain it as in a negative sentence, which is a lack of light is darkness. And how do you achieve darkness? Is to remove every source of light, not create a source. You cannot create a source of darkness. You can only remove all sources of light. That's where the darkness comes. And the same is true with space. What is space? The lack of everything is space, and you cannot create space. Only thing you can do is remove everything else, and the space is there. Similarly, the stillness is what remains when we stop thinking, stop the mental chatter. And I think I use this in some of the discussions as I was saying. Yes, maybe because they are, so space is stillness. I don't know. These are very profound statements to make whether space is stillness or not. I would leave those questions open. Maybe that's where you want to respond. So Suresh is asking, is space stillness?
What is this source space? I didn't understand the question.
So he's saying it doesn't mean that space is equal to stillness.
I can't really answer this question. When you talk of stillness, it essentially means absence of movement. So, absence of movement primarily, most importantly, is of the thought, of course, because the thoughts are constantly reverberating in the mind. And when you talk of space, we essentially say space is what is something which is there, in which everything else is there. We are all contained in space, and it becomes manifest only when we look at it surrounded by certain obstructions. So it becomes manifest. a room has a space inside it. It will become manifest because of the walls. But there is infinite space. You look at the stars and you can see there is infinite space open in front of you. So all of us, these stars, human beings, plants, everything is in space. So one can visualize it in that sense. So to put equality in a mathematical sense would not make much sense to me really. Though in some sense maybe it is true, I don't know. Because I remember Eckhart Tolle mentioning about now equal to universal consciousness, which he says is something which is really not intellectually discernible. It makes no sense intellectually. But since everything happens in now, and the knowledge of now arises in consciousness, there is no difference between them. So I am not in a position to really respond to this question whether space is equal to stillness or not. But the experience of stillness is there in the sense that when the mind is quietened down and there isn't any agitation in the mind, but you are alert, you are not sleeping, you are alert and aware, and the mind is quietened down. So you get an experience of stillness. That is, by assimilating the experience of space, stillness comes. That also is within the experience. Within some, I have such experiences that when you sit quietly and reflect and see, if you sit on the terrace and have a look at the stars and see the space and sound and engulf your mind in the infinite space, which is one of the jhanas actually, putting attention on infinite space, that gives rise to stillness. So whether that makes it equal or not, I can't say. But meditating on space gives rise to stillness of the mind. That is some hints of experience people have of that kind. So that's the most I can say about it.
So, horizontal dimension believes idle time is wasted time.
Point out one thing.
Yeah.
It occurred to me, maybe it is worth pointing out. Just go to the previous slide. The beauty of these horizontal questions is, and the kind of illusion they create, they are all based on an assumption of I. And if you don't challenge that assumption, which means you don't ask the other questions, then you will get solutions to these questions within that domain of I only. And that is the biggest bottleneck in this, is that. At least my experience.
Yes, sir, but they're never permanent, sir. Those solutions are never permanent.
No, you know that. For example, how to get over my anger? Yeah, you just observe it, meditate, keep on meditating, keep on observing, anger will reduce, and it does reduce. How will I get enlightenment? You keep on meditating in this manner, anger is reducing, slowly, it becomes finished and you will be free. Why do I have restlessness? Because you are not meditating properly, so meditate properly. Restlessness will reduce. So you have an answer to them. That is the tragedy of these horizontal questions. You get answers which are satisfying.
Yeah.
And therefore, you never question the basic assumption within that horizontal question.
But sometimes you feel that those answers are not correct. Inside something you know that maybe I have found that they are not working. You could then convince yourself that you are not meditating properly. That's why they are not working. But maybe inherently you know maybe something is wrong.
So usually we tend to think, majority of us tend to think कि ठीक से मैं ध्यान नहीं कर रहा हूँ, टाइम नहीं निकाल पा रहा हूँ, सुबह शाम ध्यान नहीं कर रहा हूँ, बहुत बिजी हूँ, so I should meditate more. So you want to do this more of same thing. So that is the trap of these horizontal questions. If you don't see through them very deeply, You get caught in that. That's how we get caught in the conventions and caught in the various kinds of assumptions and various schools of tradition. We get caught in that because you're not asking the other questions at all.
Yes, sir.
That is the power of that one single word, anatta. If you don't dwell into that question, then everything is sorted out. Everything will remain within the domain, horizontal domain, because you see, the anicca is an experience which you can easily get. Suffering is an experience which is all pervading, and you can see the relationship to them and then be satisfied with it.
Yeah.
And
But
whenever,
anatta, you never can feel anatta.
yeah, because it's not something to be felt.
Yeah.
Anatta is not an experience, anatta is an understanding. We spent so many years in trying to think that anatta is also an experience. It is an understanding. And that understanding will give you realization. It's not like a felt experience of anicca.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
So Shailesh is asking this.
Yeah. Not sure I follow you. Need to meditate to get out of the rut of life. So this horizontal view is essential to transcend. Yes, certainly. We begin with the horizontal view only. No doubt about it. But if we keep the questions alive, if we don't succumb to the assumptions, if we have a investigative nature, then we can transcend it. Or if we read the teaching properly. Buddha gave a comprehensive teaching. He didn't give a partial teaching. He didn't say you do this, then you will do this. He gave a graduated teaching for different schools of different people with different understanding. So to some he said you start from Shila, you start from Dana, you start from this, then do this, then do this. But eventually one has to overcome the illusion of identity. That is of crucial importance. Certainly, you start with the horizontal questions, no doubt about it. But then you keep in awareness the fact that there is an underlying assumption, and then that assumption is questioned. Because if the mind is so much overwhelmed by restlessness, there is no way that vertical question will even arise. So, some modicum of reduction in anger, reduction in restlessness, some concentration level of mind is certainly needed, there's no doubt. And that is the working within the domain of personality. But then we should understand in due course that we cannot get out of this cycle of suffering while retaining the assumption of personality.
But sir, the whole path is not clear to me. It becomes more hazy. In this whole path of realization, what is the doing we need to do and what is the non-doing?
You see, when we see the total teaching of the Buddha, then it will become clear. If you see specific parts of it, then we can get confused. If you see only this book and say, okay, everything else is futile, only develop understanding of anatta, then also we'll be caught. So he himself in the later on mentions in the final chapters the graduated teaching importance of two domains of teaching. Because the essence of it is we investigate, we understand. That is the essence. Understand what? Understand why we suffer. Simple, because that is the fundamental teaching. And the depth to which we understand it, that is the depth to which we can keep on questioning. So whenever we suffer, the path, as far as practice is concerned, is quite straight. Whenever we suffer, we experience suffering. Experience it emotionally, intellectually, physically, in the body, and let the suffering naturally cease, which means we need certain practice. To let the suffering naturally cease, we need certain practice. Practice of the kind that we should not fiddle with the emotions. Normal tendency is to fiddle with it quickly. So we need to learn self-restraint. So to that extent, some practice is needed. We need to learn how not to foolishly increase our suffering, which means we need to learn self-restraint of Shila. Shila is basically for minimizing our suffering and minimizing the suffering of others due to our foolish actions. That's all. So those parts of the Eightfold Path are necessary, they are not futile. When we see it in the totality, we can see that they are necessary. They are sort of prerequisites. If I am given to constant lying and constantly hurting others, there is no way that I will be able to understand suffering. Impossible. I will not be able to experience that I am suffering. I will immediately say this person is causing me suffer and shoot him out. Because I am not given to self-restraint. Self-observation comes from self-restraint. Now since we are meditators, we have been meditating for so many years, we take it for granted now. Because we have developed that much ability of self-restraint. Less or more, we have developed it. You tell a totally untrained person, unless he has a past karma of that kind that he can see through it quickly, majority of the people will not be able to see. उसे कहो कि तुम्हें गुस्सा आता है तो गुस्से को देखोगे क्या? मूर्खता वाली बात है. Can't figure it out. You observe the body or you observe the feelings and the sensations. Can't figure it out. Because, so that is the importance. So training is really important, no doubt about it. But it can become a bondage. If you remain within the training and think that training itself will take us out, then it will become a bondage. So training of Shila, training of mind to make it less agitated, to keep it within certain limits of movement is very, very important prerequisite. So all those Shila, Samadhi are important. They will lead to Panya eventually by practice. So from the point of view of actual doing, those steps need to be followed. We are now talking about understanding it through to the question of breaking through. We are not saying just how to reduce the tension, how to become less unhappy. We are not doing that exercise now. So to break through means to are trying to cut the fetter of Sakkaya Ditthi. If you cut the fetter of Sakkaya Ditthi, you will be, and that is the strongest fetter. Other things are come very easily to good meditators. The Shilavat Paramarsh comes quite easily to good meditators. Rituals have not much value, you understand it easily. Vichikitsa, the doubt also to good meditators will go off. That yes, this path of self-observation is very good. Buddha's path is certainly valid. Shilavat Paramarsh and these are automatically followed with practice. But Sakkaya Ditthi does not come so easily unless you investigate. So all this what we are doing is to break through that fetter of Sakkaya Ditthi so that strong, tenacious identification with body-mind complexes curtailed. So
Actually, it's still not clear to me. When we say that Buddha says that there is suffering, and then we say that let the suffering be there. Don't try to solve it in more normal sense.
No, he's not saying that. He's not saying that. He says, I teach suffering and the end of suffering. He's not saying. There's a paradox, no? As I had mentioned many times. There's a paradox involved in it. The issue is that we try to understand suffering. Then we understand the cause of it. We see through the cessation of it. Third noble truth is seeing the cessation of it. It's not that we are masochists who try to enjoy making ourselves suffer. We're not doing that. it is an intelligent way, a wise way of seeing through the illusion of personality, which is the core cause of suffering. In the beginning, we start from suffering, understand it, experience it, so that we don't allow the mind to get overwhelmed. Basically, that is the idea. We don't allow the mind to get overwhelmed. But that will happen only if you have certain basic minimal training. For most of us, not for all. Some people, most of us do require a training. When we have a massive suffering, we are not in a position to understand and see through it and see what effect it is producing on the body. We are able to see that only when we have a heart attack and go to the doctor, not before that. So what he's pointing out is the need for preliminary. That's why he said eightfold path. Why should he have said it eightfold path? In that very first discourse he said, no? The fourth noble truth is eightfold path for overcoming that suffering. Why? Because of these reasons. No, a perfect teacher can see through that and prescribe a method which is applicable to all. Semi-perfect teacher cannot see through it, and therefore he'll say like Krishnamurti, तुम्हें समझ में नहीं आता, पागल हो तुम लोग, क्या करूँगा, illusion में पड़े रहते हो. Buddha will not say तुम illusion में पड़े रहते हो. He said this is the way, slowly, a graduated teaching to get through that. So you have to appreciate the fact is that Krishnamurti was telling the truth. वो कोई झूठ नहीं बोल रहे थे, बिल्कुल correct. But as he himself realized towards the later part of his life, कि मैं बोलता ही रहता हूँ, किसी को फर्क नहीं पड़ता. But he said, ठीक है, मैं तो बोलता ही रहूँगा, नहीं फर्क पड़ता, ना पड़े. So the paradox in that has to be realized, appreciated. Nobody wants to suffer. There is a hard fact of existence. But creating aversion towards suffering is not the way out of it. Accepting that this human realm is of the nature of suffering is the way out of it. That's the paradox. And once you accept it, then you see phenomena as arising and passing away. You don't take them as suffering at all. That is the nutshell of the whole thing. The training which we are trying to give to the mind to see through the illusions is basically for that purpose.
So, what is the meditation we need to do?
Observation. That's what we have been. Even Goenkaji teaches us the same thing. Observe what is happening in the body, observe what is happening in the mind, observe, do the Satipatthana in the proper sense of the term as taught by the Buddha.
But sir, it becomes more mechanical.
No, it is up to us. No? That is up to us, whether we want to make it mechanical or make it alive. It is up to us.
Yeah, so what is the way by which we can avoid this trap of generating I in the meditation?
I in the meditation usually does not get generated so easily. It happens only when you suddenly become either despair or you become ecstatic. इतना अच्छा ध्यान हो रहा है, मेरा तो मन ही ऐसा है, ध्यान ही नहीं लगता. Those two extremes are where I get it. It's not in the meditation only that I has to become aware. In fact, the remaining 22 hours of the day, I is getting constantly strengthened and strengthened and strengthened. So if you are not aware of I getting strengthened for 22 hours, in those 2 hours of morning evening meditation, the I may not arise more than one or twice. But 22 hours it is constantly arising. तो फिर कैसे काम चलेगा?
But sir, the question which I wanted to ask was that most of the time, ultimately, either the attempt to do meditation more than trying to grasp something becomes a failure.
If you try
And
to
then,
goal, then there will be a failure. Otherwise, the meditation can never be a failure. If you have a goal to achieve, then it is a failure. If you say, I have to sit, is bathing a failure? कभी ऐसा होता है कि नहाना फेलियर हो गया आज?
Yes, sir.
पानी आया तो नहा लिया, पानी कम आया तो नहा लिया, कभी सावन होता कभी नहीं था तो वैसे ही चला गया. So what? We don't say bathing has become a failure.
Yes, sir.
So we just sitting, relax. Biggest thing is just relax. अजान चा की बात याद रख लो, holiday of the heart. That is meditation. It's not doing something. मुझे संवेदना नहीं मालूम पड़ रही, मेरा मन बहुत भटक रहा है, अरे भटकने दो यार, जाने दो. चलो देखते हैं आज मन कहाँ भटकेगा. I think for majority of the intellectuals that should be the primary exercise. You should sit and see, ठीक है, आज देखते हैं मन कहाँ भटकेगा. Forget about sensation, forget about breath, just don't care. Let me sit and see, देखते हैं मन कहाँ भटकेगा. You'll see it will not. Once it is under the gaze, mind will not run around here and there. And then naturally your attention will be drawn towards either the breath or the sensation. Be happy. Don't bother to go through it. इसी ऑर्डर में जाना चाहिए, ये पोर्शन छूट गया, वो हो गया, ये हो गया. वो सब ट्रेनिंग की बात है यार. जब आप बैठे हो, फर्स्ट थिंग यू डू इज सेटल डाउन पीसफुली इन मेडिटेशन. सी योर पॉस्चर, कैसे बैठा हूँ. जो ग्रॉस सेंसेशन होता है आराम से मालूम पड़ जाते हैं. ग्रॉस मूवमेंट्स आराम से मालूम पड़ जाती है, पेट की, छाती की, सांस आ रहा है जा रहा है, एक दो बार देख लिया. एंड देन मेक योर अटेंशन, बिकॉज वी आर मोस्ट सफरिंग ड्यू टू द माइंड. कि अच्छा अब देखते हैं मन में क्या हो रहा है. जस्ट सिट विद दैट इंटेंशन कि आज देखते हैं मन में क्या हो रहा है, कहाँ जाता है. फॉरगेट अबाउट एवरीथिंग एल्स. मन भटकेगा तो मालूम पड़ जाएगा मन भटक रहा है. और जैसे ही मालूम पड़ेगा मन भटक रहा है, मन अपने आप या तो सांस की ओर चला जाएगा या संवेदना की ओर चला जाएगा. जहां जाए जाने दो ना, उसी को देख लो. रिलैक्स, डोंट मेक इट ए बिग इशू. जहां मन जाता है उसको देख लिया, सांस की ओर जा रहा है, संवेदना की ओर जा रहा है, उसको देख लिया. जहां पे मिल रही है अच्छी बात. एंड विद एन अंडरस्टैंडिंग, इट्स नॉट मी, नॉट माइंड. So that understanding has to be developed more and more and more and more. Focus on mind, because mind, I have seen most of the time, that is the real problem. वो भटकता रहता है बहुत और हम उससे बेचैन हो जाते हैं. If you keep the gaze on the mind, then things will get reduced. And slowly, whenever you have time, किसी दिन संडे के दिन, सैटरडे के दिन, follow the whole Satipatthana. Investigate करो. See the arising and passing away of the various Nivaran Pampam जो है ना, arising of various obstructions.
Yeah.
Those obstructions are the real problem. But उनके भी पीछे पड़ने की जरूरत नहीं है. ठीक है तो just after what are we trying to do? Being aware. सैरागम व चित्तम, सैरागम चित्तम से पजाना. वो ये नहीं कह रहे कि राग जो है मेरे को हटाना है, वो कहीं नहीं कहा भगवान ने. चित्त में राग है, वो जानता, अच्छा इस समय मेरे चित्त में राग है. That's it. And the beauty of the nature is, the moment you accept it, वो अपने आप बदल जाए. आपको कुछ नहीं करना है. हम उसमें फिडल करते हैं, अरे यार इतने साल हो गए साधना करते हुए, अभी भी देखो मेरे को राग जाग रहा है, गुस्सा आ रहा है, बेचैनी हो रही है, डाउट हो रहा है, नींद आ रही है, रेस्टलेसनेस हो रही है. बिकॉज वी टेक देम पर्सनली. टेक दीज फिनोमेना विच आर अराइजिंग बिकॉज ऑफ वेरियस कंडीशंस. रात को सोया नहीं, और घर पे झगड़ा हुआ, बॉस से कुछ कह दिया, या मैंने किसी को डांट दिया, इस कारण से हो रहा है. यार ठीक है, जो भी कारण है होने दो ना. इस समय ये एक्सपीरियंस आया है, इट्स नॉट पर्सनलाइज इट. एक्सपीरियंस आया है, सो दैट इज द की थिंग. So if you practice like that, then practice becomes joy, not a burden. जहाँ practice burden होने लगे ना, तो you should stop and investigate and discuss. ये क्या हो गया जी, एक और पहले ही काफी बोझ थे मेरे पे, एक और आ गया बोझ.
So most of the time it becomes that.
हाँ, तो उसको investigate करो, छोड़ दो. Do some jogging instead. And do some walking meditation. Jogging करो and be aware. When you walk, be aware कि मेरी अच्छा मैं देख रहा हूँ मेरी just don't be aware कि मैं देख रहा हूँ. अवेयर कि देखने से क्या हो रहा है, मन में राग जाग रहा है, अच्छा ये अच्छा लग रहा है, ये बुरा लग रहा है, ये फोटो अच्छी लग रही है, ये कपड़े अच्छे लग रहे हैं, ये पेड़ बुरा लग रहा है. Just be aware of the reaction we are producing. Great meditation.
So one of the way I try to cultivate awareness, I don't know whether that was correct or not, was that like in more day-to-day life, if uh, I plant a question in myself that do I want something, or am I liking something, or am I disliking something, and then keep this question alive by repeating this question at various moments again and again. And at each moment, when you search for that answer, the answer will come that, oh, I don't want this thing to happen, and I want this thing to happen. And this way, one can see that how our reactions are uh, controlled by what mind likes and what mind doesn't like. Like I can give a simple example of that is I was like watching TV and like watching news on the TV, and suddenly there was this portion of news comes which somehow stirs something inside, and one doesn't like what's being shown, or one has strong reactions in that. And the easy thing to do is that you press a button and you change the channel, and then you uh, go to other channel and get busy, make your mind busy in that channel. But the moment when you are going to change the channel, you ask the question, are you liking it or not liking it? And then you get to know that this is your reaction of your mind not liking something, is, and then you want to get rid, and suddenly you press a button and want to move out of that uncomfortable situation.
The questioning is a part of Dhamma investigation. That is perfectly fine, but that should not become again another mechanical activity. That should be, we should also see what effect that liking and disliking is doing on our body. Whenever we like or dislike something, what effect it is doing on the body. Because the body has a very strong inner intelligence of its own. And remaining with the body is very helpful in grounding us, keeping us mind from running astray. But otherwise, one can get caught in that horizontal question and remain within that domain.
Within the, I think that is the problem most of the time happens, that we slip into that horizontal questions and then flow in that.
More aware of what is happening in the body. When you are doing meditation and focusing on the thought process, obviously thoughts will in due course stop, then you can be aware of the body. And then slowly and slowly you get tuned to observing the body and thoughts in tandem. Observing, your primary attention is either on the breath or on the sensations, and whenever the mind wanders away, you become aware of it and bring it back. In this way, that is the way we normally should be practicing meditation. So sensations on the foot or on the body, wherever, and whenever the mind wanders away, you bring it back. So it's just doing meditation like that, like you are doing in sitting. So it's equally effective.
But sir, in this simple meditation process, when we say that ground the attention on the body and then observe the mind, and as soon as it wanders, you bring back. So if we keep this basic framework of meditation, that doesn't explain that how will it make you see suffering or come out of suffering? Or how will it go toward more vertical direction?
In meditation, whenever suffering arises, it will have an effect on the body. And you will observe it the effect it is on the body, and not react to it, then you will experience cessation of the suffering. And in the process of moving from experience of suffering to the cessation of suffering, the cause will automatically become evident. So
Okay.
you can see that all of that can be seen actually. If one is grounded, which means one does not run away from the situation. You see, while sitting in front of a TV, you have a remote, change the channel. Life does not give you opportunity to change the channel. You are faced with your wife or your husband or your boss. You can't switch him off. So very much like
Yes,
isn't
sir.
it? So there, you have to face the situation. There you have to be grounded and then respond.
Mm. Yes, sir.
Good.
That makes sense.
Okay, I think it's quite late now. Thank you. Next Sunday I will be traveling. I'll be reaching Delhi on next Sunday early morning. So we may not be able to meet. So then on 15th we'll meet at my home. Okay. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very
Namaste.
much. Yes. It's good.